Welcome back, coin lovers. Today we're talking about the Indian Half Rupee 1946. The Indian Half Rupee of 1946 stands today as one of the most historically loaded coins ever, created under the British Raj, a coin that entered circulation at a moment when the political heartbeat of the entire Indian subcontinent was racing faster than ever before. To understand this coin, one must step into the world of 1946, a world shaped by famine, war, revolution, hope, and an empire collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. This was not just a transitional year, it was the last full year of British rule in India, the final stretch of an era that had lasted nearly 2 centuries, the last time the British Crown minted coins for a land that no longer wanted to bow, no longer wanted to wait, and no longer wanted to live under foreign rule. The half rupee, struck in Bombay and Calcutta, entered the hands of millions of people who had no idea that within months, the country's entire monetary identity would start to change forever. On its obverse, the coin carries the portrait of King George VI, wearing the imperial crown, a symbol meant to show the power, authority, and right to rule of the British monarchy. But by 1946, this portrait had become a shadow of its original meaning. It represented not dominance but desperation, not strength but survival, not confidence but the last flicker of an empire running out of breath. India in 1946 was a nation simmering with tension and transformation. For decades, movements like the non-cooperation movement, the Salt March, and Quit India had shaken the foundations of British power. Subhash Chandra Bose had formed the Indian National Army. Gandhi had mobilized millions with non-violence. The Muslim League had grown more powerful. Congress leadership was negotiating constantly. And among all of this, the British were running out of money, soldiers, support, and time. The Second World War had drained the tears of the British economy to the point where they could barely run their own country, let alone govern India. The empire that once prided itself on endless wealth was now borrowing money from the United States, cutting down silver reserves, and losing grip over its colonies. The 1946 half rupee reflects this economic crisis in a direct way. Its silver content had been reduced to 50%, much lower than the earlier coins of British India. The reduction was not just a technical choice, it was a financial confession. It was the British silently saying, "We can't afford the old purity anymore." Every half rupee minted that year carried the invisible signature of a collapsing empire. If you hold the coin today and tilt it under the light, you're not just seeing worn metal, you're looking into the eyes of a dying superpower. While the British were weakening, India was rising. 1946 was the year of the Royal Indian Navy Mutiny, when more than 20,000 Indian sailors revolted against British officers and openly raised the tricolor flag. It was the year when negotiations for independence gained unstoppable momentum. It was also the year when communal tensions deepened, especially as the question of partition grew louder. Every speech, every protest, every decision of 1946 was pushing India closer to freedom, but also closer to division. And while these seismic political events were unfolding, ordinary people continued living their lives buying food, selling grain, paying wages, trading goods off and using the half rupee. Imagine the scenes. A farmer in Punjab handing over this coin to buy seeds. A trader in Calcutta counting a stack of half rupees in his shop. Soldiers returning from war using it to pay for tea on a railway platform. Mothers saving it for emergencies. Children playing games with it. Freedom fighters using it to fund underground work. This coin passed through hands that shaped history. Hands that suffered, hands that dreamed. Hands that worked day and night to survive the storm of 1946. But what truly makes this coin iconic is the lion on its reverse side. Officially, The lion symbolized British authority in India. It was meant to portray power, confidence, and order. But by 1946, the symbol began to take a new meaning. The lion was no longer seen as the representative of British might. It became an unintentional mirror of India itself. Strong, determined, chained yet moving forward, ready to roar. The lion's walk came to signify a nation on the verge of breaking free. Under the lion, the word India appears boldly, and below it the date 1946, marking the year before the birth of independent India. That single word and date, India, 1946, capture an entire civilization's final moment under foreign rule. It is like a calm before a storm, a whisper before a scream, a heartbeat before a revolution. Holding this coin today feels like holding a time capsule that contains the last breath of British India and the first spark of an independent nation. As 1946 unfolded across the Indian subcontinent, the half rupee circulated through markets buzzing with uncertainty, through cities brimming with political tension, and through villages waiting for clarity in the fog of change. The British administration, though outwardly trying to maintain order, was internally fractured, exhausted, and increasingly aware that their time in India had run out. The cabinet mission had arrived early in 1946, desperately attempting to negotiate a plan that could keep India within the British Commonwealth. But the millions who used the half rupee every day were not concerned with London's negotiations or bureaucratic debates. They were living the reality on the ground. Public life was guided by three truths. Independence was coming, communal divisions were increasing, and the old British economic machine was rapidly disintegrating. And amidst this storm of political and economic chaos, the half rupee continued to function, quietly bearing witness to every crisis, every conversation, and every hidden struggle of everyday life. To truly understand the historical weight of this coin, one must imagine the soundscape of India in 1946, the loud clang of railway stations where soldiers returned from war, the shouts of vendors in bustling bazaars of Lahore and Delhi, the rhythmic turning of handlooms in Bengal, the chants of nationalist rallies, the tense discussions in political offices, and the quiet prayers in homes where families hoped for stability in uncertain times. This coin traveled through all these environments, carrying with it not just economic value but emotional weight. Each time the coin changed hands, it carried stories of hunger, resilience, aspiration, and struggle. India was not a calm land in 1946. It was a nation caught between two worlds, the world of colonial rule that was dying, and the world of independence that had not yet fully arrived. And in this transition, every administrative structure, including the currency system, was strained, fragmented, and ready for transformation. Politically, 1946 was a year of battlefield tension without actual war. The British, weakened from World War II, could no longer govern effectively. Their military was stretched thin, their treasury was bleeding, and their global authority was questioned. Everywhere from the Middle East to Africa to Asia, India was the empire's final jewel, the last large territory whose loss would signify the death of British supremacy. When King George VI's face was stamped onto the half rupee in 1946, it symbolized more than authority, it symbolized insecurity. The empire wanted to remind every Indian hand that touched the coin of the crown's presence, but the iron grip that once held India firmly had become nothing more than a ceremonial shadow. This psychological shift is crucial to understanding why the 1946 half rupee is so historically priceless today. It captures the exact moment when imperial imagery lost its power, when kingship became an empty symbol, and when Indians mentally transitioned from subjects to citizens. Economically, India in 1946 was standing on fragile ground. Prices were rising, wages were unstable, agricultural output was inconsistent, and industrial production was struggling to recover from wartime exploitation. Millions had died in the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, and the wounds of that tragedy were still fresh. People feared new shortages and hoarded coins like the half rupee for security. The British had reduced silver purity to preserve their dwindling reserves, and even this small change affected daily life. For decades, Indians measured wealth in terms of silver coins pure, heavy, reliable. But by 1946, the coins were lighter, paler, and less valuable. The people knew something was wrong with the financial backbone of the empire. They could feel it in the weight of the coin, in its shine, in its sound when it hit the table. A pure coin makes a sharp ringing sound. The 1946 version had a slightly duller tone. It was as if the coin itself was mourning the decay of an age. Traders, jewelers, and rural families who traditionally saved silver immediately understood the coin's hidden message. The empire was weakening. Economic fear mingled with political hope, creating an emotional blend that defined the soul of 1946. Meanwhile, the subcontinent's political map was shifting beneath everyone's feet. The Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was demanding a separate homeland, while the Indian National Congress was focused on maintaining a united India. This ideological conflict grew sharper with every passing month. Street protests, community tensions, political speeches, and negotiations filled the national space with anxiety. And yet, through all this, daily transactions had to continue. People still needed food, clothes, tools, medicines, and shelter. The half rupee was the lifeline of everyday commerce. Whether one supported independence, partition, or neither, everyone relied on this coin. It became a silent meeting point where political enemies shared the same economic reality. The farmer paying land tax, the soldier receiving salary, the trader selling cloth, the mother purchasing grain all depended on the half rupee, a coin that transcended politics while simultaneously being shaped by it. The Royal Indian Navy Mutiny of 1946, one of the most significant but often overlooked events in the freedom struggle, also saw this coin in play. When over 20,000 Indian sailors revolted in Bombay, refusing to obey British officers, the port city became a battlefield. Strikes, riots, hunger, and negotiations ensued. Many sailors had saved half rupees from their pay, and as food supplies were cut, some used their savings to support civilians who stood with them. The half rupee became a symbol of solidarity among rebels, workers, and citizens. British officers feared the mutiny could ignite a nationwide revolution, and indeed, for a moment, India stood on the brink of a massive, violent uprising. But the revolt ended after appeals from national leaders. Yet the message was clear. British control over the armed forces was collapsing. The coin minted with the king's face was circulating among sailors who had openly defied the king's authority. Symbolism could not get more powerful than this. At the same time, India's cultural and social fabric was undergoing dramatic change. Artists, writers, poets, and intellectuals were capturing the mood of the nation through literature and art. Newspapers discussed freedom, partition, nationalism, and identity. The half rupee, though silent, was part of every cultural moment. Its presence in pockets, safes, and savings boxes tied together the lives of millions who otherwise lived in completely different worlds. In wealthy homes of Bombay's business elites, the coin was counted in large piles. In rural huts, it was treasured like a precious object. In government offices, it flowed through salaries. In political meetings, it funded resistance. In villages hit by famine, it decided who lived and who starved. The coin had become a universal, witness a metallic diary, absorbing the emotions of a nation in transition. As 1946 marched toward its dramatic conclusion, the Indian half rupee continued circulating through a land trembling under the weight of destiny. Every corner of the subcontinent felt a strange duality: hope and fear, excitement and sorrow, unity and division. The British had realized more deeply than ever that ruling India had become impossible. The cabinet mission had failed to secure a united constitutional framework. Communal tensions were increasing, and both Congress and the Muslim League were preparing for a future neither fully understood. Amidst this heightened tension, the half rupee remained the single most stable object in everyday life, passing through hands that were shaping history without realizing it. The coin was used in buying newspapers that carried headlines of political negotiations, in paying wages to laborers who stood in long food queues, in purchasing cloth for tricolor flags secretly stitched in homes, and in running the last remnants of a colonial economy that was moments away from disappearing. The coin was no longer just currency, it was the pulse of a land ready to be reborn. Its worn edges, fading shine, and reduced silver content reflected a political truth. The old empire was dying, and a new world was rising. By late 1946, India's cities were exploding with political rallies, strikes, and speeches. In Calcutta, the Direct Action Day violence left thousands dead, marking one of the darkest chapters in pre-independence India. Hindus and Muslims found themselves torn between centuries of shared culture and the sudden, aggressive push toward partition. In Punjab, Bihar, Bengal, and Sindh, tension rose like monsoon clouds. And yet, even in those moments of horror, the half rupee continued its journey. It was exchanged by families fleeing violence, by refugees gathering essential supplies, by farmers desperately trying to save next season's seeds, and by traders forced to shut their shops during riots. The coin witnessed bloodshed and sorrow, but also moments of humanity: strangers helping strangers regardless of religion, neighbors sharing their last coins to buy food for families who had nowhere to go. The half rupee became a tiny bridge between communities collapsing under fear. It carried the fingerprints of both victims and rescuers, of protesters and peacemakers, of rebels and rulers. No historian, no archival document, no book can capture the emotional truth of 1946 better than the objects that people actually touched, and this coin is one of those objects. As the months progressed, British administrators were increasingly unable to control the subcontinent. Soldiers refused orders, police forces were demoralized, and civil services were exhausted. The Indian National Congress and the Muslim League both demanded immediate political transfer. The British Treasury, meanwhile, sent urgent messages from London. Britain could no longer afford its empire. Silver reserves were too low. Trade routes were broken. The British pound was collapsing. India had once been the empire's wealthiest colony, but by 1946 it had become a financial burden they could no longer carry. This is why the 1946 half rupee holds such deep symbolic significance. It is one of the very last silver-based coins minted under the Raj, representing the last breath of an exhausted economic system. After independence, silver coins would virtually vanish from mass circulation as both countries, India and the soon-to-be-created Pakistan, turned toward more affordable alloys. So the 1946 half rupee is not just the end of an era politically, it is the end of an era economically. It marks the moment when a centuries-old currency tradition crumbled under modern economic realities. By the time 1947 approached, every transport system in India, trains, buses, boats, postal routes, was flooded with people moving, migrating, waiting, or escaping. The half rupee traveled with them, carried in cloth pouches, tied in sari corners, hidden in pockets, wrapped in prayer cloths, or sealed in tin boxes. For refugees fleeing Punjab and Bengal, these coins were often the only surviving pieces of their former lives. Some carried them across borders into the newly created Pakistan, where these same half rupees continued circulating briefly before new national coins replaced them. Others kept the coins as emotional memories, as reminders of homes they had lost forever. For many families, the 1946 half rupee became a relic of stability during a time when everything else was uncertain. It became a symbol of survival, belonging, and resilience. Even decades later, when children asked their grandparents about partition, they were sometimes shown this coin worn, faded, but alive with memory. The metal may have lost its shine, but the emotions inside it never faded. And finally came the moment that changed everything. The midnight of August 15, 1947. India became an independent nation. Fireworks lit the sky, people danced in streets, temples and mosques echoed with prayers, and the tricolor flag rose for the first time over government buildings. Pakistan too celebrated its birth, a day earlier on August 14th. It was a moment of triumph, pain, joy, and heartbreak all at once. And the 1946 half rupee stood right at the border between two worlds, the world of colonial India that ended at 11:59 p.m. on August 14th, and the world of free India that began at 12 a.m. on August 15th. That precise night, tens of millions of people still had this coin in their pockets. It became a time capsule, a silent witness to the greatest political transformation in South Asian history. It was the last coin of a dying empire and the first coin of a rising nation. In that single night, its identity shifted forever. Yesterday, it belonged to the British Crown. Today, it belonged to free Indians. In the years that followed, new coins were introduced with the lion, capital of Ashoka, replacing the king's portrait. Silver coins faded away as cheaper metals took their place. Slowly, the 1946 half rupee disappeared from regular use and entered the world of collectors, historians, and families who had preserved it as a reminder of the past. Today, when collectors hold this coin, they are not just touching a piece of metal, they are touching the final heartbeat of British India, the turmoil of 1946, the trauma of partition, and the birth of two nations. They are touching a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, struggle, and rebirth. They are touching a coin that has tasted the dust of history in a way very few objects have. The Indian half rupee, 1946, is a masterpiece not because it is rare or valuable, but because it contains an entire universe of human experience within its small round frame. Its scratches are stories, its dents are memories, its faded shine is emotion, and its weight is history. It is a coin that captures the end of a world and the beginning of another, a coin that truly deserves its legendary place in the halls of numismatics. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe CoinAgeEra for more interesting videos.